Well, one thing to feel punchy about the ins and outs of the NFL's new replay review expansion that applies to offensive and defensive pass interference. That was the big story in Arizona. It was a rule that got thrown together in a day. Rich McKay, the chairperson of the competition committee, said we made sausage in a day, which probably isn't the best way to be making rules because they didn't anticipate, the competition committee didn't anticipate what kind of pushback they were going to get from the coaches, from the owners, and they had to slap this thing together. So knowing what we know now, Big Cat, and there are plenty of questions that still need to be answered. But the blanket notion that offensive and defensive pass interference will be as reviewable as any other thing that can be reviewed. Challenge flag during the normal course of events, automatic replay review after turnovers and touchdowns, automatic replay review in the final 2 minutes of either half or overtime. What was your reaction to the news that the NFL is now crossing this boundary of making pass interference, both offensive and defensive, subject to replay review?
I hate it. It's an overreaction, and the blood is on your hands, Mike Florio, because you were asking for this. We had this discussion right after the Saints-Rams when everyone was overreacting, including you, and I said, calm down. It happens once every however many years. It's never happened. That type of blown call has never really happened in the NFL to that extent at that stage. Let's not create an entirely new rule, more replays. And you know what, Mike? What I really hate, you throw in a flag on the field. So basically plays that don't have flags, you get to add a flag, and now you can find it on any play. Where does it stop? You can find holding on any play. You can find pass interference on any play. This is not going to work out. Like, I don't want this. What I want is a simple mechanism, as you say, where they can basically have someone sitting in New York City and stop the game if something egregious happens, which happens 1 in a million plays. That's what we need. We don't need the ability for coaches to throw flags, add flags to the field, more replays. Offensive pass interference or defensive pass interference, they're subjective. When you slow it down, it makes it look like everything is pass interference. I hate this new rule, Mike.
And look, I wanted change, but this is not the change I wanted. I wanted the sky judge. I wanted the extra official who is in the booth watching all of the camera angles that we see at home, bridging the gap between what the officials who are out there on the field trying, number one, to stay alive and not get trampled, bridging the gap between what they see in real time with the naked eye and what the rest of us see at home. And if you have that official in the booth, that's when you can buzz the referee and say, drop a flag, pick up a flag, do this. And it doesn't require the game to be stopped. It's no different than that quick caucus that we'll see on the field where a couple of officials talk to each other. That would have been a much better solution because that's your break glass in event of emergency option where you've got one person who oversees everything that's happening on the field, and that person is a member of the officiating crew just with a different perspective than what the other officials have. I don't like the idea that this replay review is going to be applied for all offensive and defensive pass interference. I felt like they had to do something, but this isn't the ideal solution, and they're going to find out it's not the ideal solution when there's a pick play that's called routinely, when offensive pass interference is called more often, when we see offsetting offensive and defensive pass interference that we never see now. But I think that's going to become a crutch for Al Riveron. Hey, let's just do the whole thing over again. There's a little pushing by the receiver. There's a little pushing by the defensive back. Let's just call it offsetting fouls and do it all over again. I think that's a possibility. So, they worry about unintended consequences when they just want to not deal with change. This is a situation where they should have been worried about unintended consequences because there could be several of them.
Everything you said just rings so hollow because you wanted this.
I want the sky judge. I want the sky judge.
You wanted this, Mike. You wanted this, and I said it. They should have realized it was a bad idea when I said it. It was a bad idea because guess what? More than anything, I speak as the most regular common fan out there, and what I don't want is more stoppage, more replays, more sitting there and going over every single angle and saying, yeah, is it this, is it that? More, I don't know, Jim. I don't want that in the game.
Right.
So they screwed this thing up. And they're going to find out real quickly. It's going to be, I think, similar to the new rules that they made last year, where they started throwing flags a lot more on hits over the middle during training camp and preseason, and then they adjusted to it in the regular season. I don't know how you adjust this, but I don't want to watch a million replays of pass interference.
Here's the thing. I think what the average fan wants is a mechanism for quickly fixing an egregious error like that. That's why the Sky Judge concept makes sense. And really what they could have done, and this happens from time to time, where Al Riveron uses that pipeline from the league office in ways that he shouldn't, telling someone to throw a flag. He could have avoided this entire mess by simply telling the referee in that game, throw a flag. There was an egregious and blatant pass interference. Even though you're not supposed to use it that way, let's fix this thing before it becomes a mess that takes over the entire game. I think that the average fan would prefer to have clear mistakes that we all agree on. The old 50 drunks in a bar standard that Mike Holmgren coined when they started replay review. If it's obvious, it's a mistake, fix it. You don't need to have replay review for every touchdown to make sure there wasn't a pick, a block more than a yard behind the line of scrimmage, that there wasn't a push-off, that there wasn't a subtle shove here or there, and slow the game down that way. I want a fail-safe for the egregious, where we all see it and we all know it's a problem. That's what I want. And I think after a year of what they've put in place, they're going to wish that that's what they had done.
Here's the other problem I have with this. The league, the scoring, the offensive nature of the league has all been great. It's obviously young quarterbacks, and look at what Patrick Mahomes is doing to the AFC West and what he's going to do for the AFC for the next decade and kind of invigorate all the football there. It's a quarterback-driven league. But at some point, you have to give the defense a chance. And this is just another thing. And I know they say they can call it both ways, right? They can call offensive pass interference, defensive pass interference. Which one do you think is going to get thrown more? It's definitely going to be the defensive pass interference. And I think it's just another thing that puts the defensive units behind the eight ball, and defense becomes harder and harder to play in the NFL year in and year out. These guys have to think too much. They can't play football. And it's going to be more points, and defense is not going to matter as much.
Yeah, I disagree with you on that. We crunched the numbers yesterday, and I'm going to get the decimals wrong because I don't remember them specifically, but the average defensive pass interference calls per team last year were 7.66, I believe. Offensive pass interference was less than 3 per team. I think we're going to have more offensive pass interference called by replay review. That's where this door is going to swing in favor of the defenses, because right now you don't see as much offensive pass interference as defensive, but you and I both know it happens. It's going to get called more, especially the pick plays, because, we can talk about the standard for indisputable visual evidence, clear and obvious, whatever. But the pick play is going to be obvious. If there is blocking happening by an eligible receiver more than 1 yard away from the line of scrimmage before the ball is thrown, that's going to be clear and obvious, and that's going to be easy to call. And every touchdown, every passing touchdown is going to require Al Riveron to look and see if there was a pick, because it's going to be obvious, it's going to be clear, and the touchdown's going to get wiped off the board if there was any blocking more than 1 yard beyond the line of scrimmage.
Blame yourself, Mike Florio. You did this to America.
I did.
You did.
Yeah,
I'm the one who said this is a bad idea.
But you didn't have any reasons other than it was a bad idea. See, now that it's happened, we can say, what about uncatchable balls? What about pick plays? What about offensive pass interference? I didn't want it for offensive pass interference. I only wanted it for defensive pass interference.
All right, let me ask you one last question about this, because I was reading an article about it this morning, doing my research, no big deal. But it seemed like, and you were down there in Arizona, they rushed this thing through because they just had to react, because Sean Payton has really made this his cause, and he's rallied a bunch of coaches behind it. It felt like they rushed this through and they didn't do a lot of thinking. And from everything I read, they were just trying to get out of there. They were just all trying to get out of there on Tuesday night and not be in Arizona anymore. So they basically said, you know what, let's do something. You can notice this by the fact that it's a 1 year trial period rule. So that makes it even worse in my mind. The fact that it was clearly rushed, it wasn't thought out. They just wanted to get out of the building. This is, the owners and the coaches, this is going to be a future them problem. When they get to the middle of the season and they're losing games, or games are slowing down and they lose momentum and all these things happen and fans are complaining, it's going to be the fact that they rushed this decision and Mike Florio. Those are the two people I'm blaming.
This is the old jury reaches a verdict at 5 o'clock on a Friday afternoon. Let's just get the hell out of here and go home and get this over with. I don't disagree with that, but here's who I blame. I blame Rich McKay, because They wanted to cram through basically no change or minimal change, and they didn't properly read the room. They didn't understand in advance where the coaches were going to come down on this, where the owners were going to come down on it. They were so caught up in their bubble of we don't need to do anything. They didn't bother to think what was going to happen when they got to Arizona and the coaches revolted and the owners said we have to do something. That, I think, is what is important to keep in mind. You have to know, if you're a member of the competition committee, you have to know which way the wind's blowing. And what they try to do is they try to create the wind. And that's where they screw up. You can't create the wind as the competition committee. The wind is still blowing beyond your meeting room. And if you don't know it before you get to the site of the league meeting, you're destined to have an outcome like this. So they did a bad job of understanding how strongly the desire was for change, and then they had to throw something together. McKay said it himself, we made sausage in a day. That's not a way to fix this problem.
That's bad sausage, and I like Sean Payton. I think Sean Payton's a fantastic coach. I think he's good for the league in general. But this is one of those situations someone had to stand up and just give Sean Payton a hug and be like, listen, man, whatever rules coming here, it's not going to bring your team back. The Saints are not coming back this year. They're not going to play in the Super Bowl. It's over. It's done. Here, take a hug. It's not your fault, Sean Payton. They're never coming back. I feel like he needs that because he's kind of chasing something that's never coming back. He's chasing his own shadow.
There's a weird dynamic within the NFL that when a team gets burned by a really bad rule, that team is against changing the rule because they think that they're going to benefit from it at some point down the road, that there's some weird football karma out there that's going to help them later. So I admire Sean Payton for saying we can't have this. I mean, you can't have these games decided by mistakes made by officials. And, Big Cat, I've heard that you like to gamble a little bit. As legalized gambling spreads throughout the country, if the NFL doesn't fix these flaws, that's when they're going to have Congress up their butts. That's what they need to be concerned about. They can't have these defects in officiating. I just don't like the fact that they fought against it for months, and then they threw something together when they realized there was no way to get out of Arizona with no change. We got to take a break. When we return, we've got some questions from you that we will be answering. I have a feeling one or two might have something to do with replay. More PFT Live coming at you right after this.
Hi, I'm Mike Tirico, and thanks for watching. Make sure to hit subscribe for the latest news and highlights from NBC Sports.